Today's sermon by Pastor Chuck Laird is titled, Where the Gold Is. Now, here's Pastor Chuck Laird.
I'd like to try a little something here real quick. For 5 seconds, I want everyone to smile. I'm watching, I'm looking. It just helps feed me a little bit, so I kind of have a feel like we're connecting a little bit. It's good for me. This is that's an incredible passage. Jeanette was doing one of her home devotions, and she called me over and said, "You got to read this." And it was in the context of a lot of what our ministry is. We started this nonprofit in 2001 called Sanctuary Christian Ministries. And sanctuary, a wildlife sanctuary, where we got it is the sanctuary of God. A wildlife sanctuary is a safe place. It's a protected place for animals where they can come and know that they're in an environment where they're protected. It's safe. And what our ministry is to try and create safer Christians, safer churches, safer people, safer relationships. And in so doing, we're trying to translate something that tends to get lost in translation. Share a little story. Well, I don't know if it's a story, but it's a little fun. The Inca Indian was captured by the Spanish. And the captain of the Spanish calls his interpreter over and has the Inca Indian brought to him. He says, "Tell this Inca Indian that if he doesn't tell us where they have hidden all the gold, that we're going to burn his feet in the fire." And so the interpreter passes the word on to this Indian. The Indian defiantly says back through the interpreter, he says, "I would rather die than tell you where the gold is." And with that, they burned the poor man's feet in the fire. And then the captain told the interpreter to say to the Inca Indian, he says, "Tell him if he doesn't tell us where the gold is, we're going to hang him from that tree, from the noose of that tree over there." And he passes this on, and the interpreter says he would rather die than tell you where the gold is. And with that, they hang this poor man until he could hardly breathe. And then finally, the third time, the captain says to the interpreter, "Bring him over here and tell him that if he doesn't tell us where the gold is, we're going to skin him alive." Well, the poor Inca Indian, he could handle this no longer. And so he says to the interpreter, he says, "I can take no more." It says, "The gold is hidden in a small cave behind a large waterfall. The waterfall is about a mile down the road and to the right." And so the interpreter says to the captain, he says he would rather die than tell you where the gold is. Yeah. Something is lost in the translation here. And that's what I want to, in my few minutes, and I will keep it few, that's what I want to share with a little bit about this morning. Well, a lot of our ministry is trying to help the church, which has been shaped by 500 years of modernism and modernist thought, how to translate the gospel to postmodern culture. And something is getting lost in the Christian translation of the good news, and it is the good news of Jesus Christ, to our culture that is increasingly skeptical of Christians and turned off to the church. We can do something different because they are not getting the message. I don't know if some of you are postmodern, some of you are visitors, some of you here today. I know a whole ton of you are Christians. Your brothers and sisters. I want to share one of the things that's getting lost in translation. And it's important that we understand this because there are, of all Sundays to have this sort of a missionary emphasis, do you know there are it is estimated up to 219 unchurched men, women, and children in the United States and Canada. And if you total that up in terms of unchurched, that would make the United States and Canada, North America, I don't have the statistics for Mexico, unfortunately, but I'm sure you would understand the same thing, the third largest mission field in the world in terms of reaching our culture. But here's the amazing thing. The majority of those people who are unchurched are formally churched. There are people who, in fact, according to George Barna's statistics, he said there's 15, by his estimates and his studies, over 15 million born-again Christians. And by his definition, which is more narrow than some, born-again Christians who no longer attend any church in the United States alone. What is getting lost in translation? If you don't hear anything else, I want you to hear this. Can you feel me looking into your eyes? I want you to hear this because I really am. I need Eugene to come up here and do this for me. He's got the gift. He's got the smile, he's got the life. So, hear this way, because the word of the Lord is here. You are God's priceless diamond. Kids, you're God's priceless diamond. You are God's priceless diamond. You have been fearfully and wonderfully made. You have been created in the image of God. Whether you're young or old, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're healthy or like me, your back is already aching from standing this much this morning. You are God's priceless diamond. And that is a message that needs to be gotten through. I want you to hear this. You are loved. You matter. You have incredible, priceless value, and it is apart from what you can do today for God or for anybody else. Your value is fixed. Not in what you do, but what Jesus did. I want you to hear this. Here's why, and this is what is getting lost in translation and why it is so incredibly important. Self-esteem in our culture has taken such a beating that you get 1,000 messages from TV and from billboards and from every source of media in the internet that you are insignificant, you are not enough unless you have my product. Unless you have this, unless you look like this, unless you're like this, unless you own this, you need this to be complete. You need this, and if you are, then you'll be happy. Otherwise, you're missing. Otherwise, you're insignificant. Otherwise, you're going to be missed. And people right and left are trying to live up to a performance expectations, and we even do it, doggone it, in our churches, where in order to be a good Christian, you have to do this and do this. And I want you to hear this. And I share this as a message to share to you and to share to our postmodern brothers and sisters and those who don't know the Lord. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. What that means is before we got our act together, before we got our Sunday best behavior going, before I got my language cleaned up and got rid of those words that I don't want to have sneaking into my thinking, before I got rid of those attitudes and cleaned those things out, before I became a good person, while I'm still where I am and where I was, before I got it all fixed, Jesus says, you matter enough that I died for you and I would do it again. Before they become Christians, they're still God's priceless diamonds. When you look and see someone whose lifestyle, whose behavior, and maybe at the store, it may be how they're dressed, it may be at Starbucks, it may be out in the streets, it may be in school, it may be anywhere you're coming into contact with people whose lifestyle may turn you off. I hope you would see, rather than the thorns, see the rose that is yet to bloom, because that's what God sees. And that's what that scripture passage is all about.